The silence in the overcrowded terminal stretched to its limits. Captain Grant Matthews stood motionless, his pilot uniform impeccably pressed, his calm demeanor seemingly detached from the storm of anger churning within. Around him, passengers halted mid-step, whispers slicing through the air like shards of glass. Standing before him was Lena Crawford, a flight attendant with a badge that glinted under the fluorescent lights. Her finger jabbed at his chest, her voice laced with provocation. "I don't care what kind of ID you're flashing. There's no way you're the captain of this flight." Grant felt every eye in the terminal turn toward him, judging, doubting, condemning. 22 years of flying across the globe, over 12,000 hours in the cockpit. And yet he was facing this. He pulled out his phone, his hand steady despite the fury and humiliation surging through his veins. Just one call to end it all. What Grant couldn't have known then was that the call would ignite a chain of events far beyond anything he could have imagined. Secrets would be exposed, lives would change, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would remain untouched after that day. 3 hours earlier, Grant Matthews had been where he belonged most, in the cockpit. Dawn had just broken over the runway of Midfield International Airport as he completed the pre-flight checks for Aerosky Airlines Flight 2387, a route from Midtown to Clearwater Bay. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner felt like an extension of his own body, responding to commands with precision and ease. At 53, Grant was one of the airline's most seasoned pilots. His salt and pepper hair and the light wrinkles around his eyes told the story of thousands of flight hours across every continent, through fierce storms, both meteorological and personal. The cockpit had been Grant's sanctuary ever since he earned his wings in the Air Force 30 years ago. One of only 3 black cadets in his training class. "System check complete," he murmured, more out of habit than necessity. Ethan Park, the co-pilot, nodded, his eyes still scanning the control panel. At 35, Ethan was relatively new to long-haul flights, but had already proven himself with impressive precision and composure. Good weather along the way to Clearwater Bay. Ethan reported after reviewing the flight plan. Might be a bit bumpy over the Silver Peak Range, but nothing major. Grant nodded. Let's try to give the passengers the smoothest ride possible today. Everything unfolded like a seamless symphony of technology and experience. But today, something felt off. A vague sense of unease crept into Grant's thoughts, like distant thunder heralding a storm. Maybe it was the text message from his daughter, Ava, the night before. "Dad, when you get back, I need to talk to you. It's important." Ava was in her final year at Westbridge Medical School, following in the footsteps of her mother Rachel, Grant's late wife. Since Rachel's passing, father and daughter had grown distant, and Grant couldn't help but worry about what Ava needed to tell him. Or perhaps it was the internal memo sent to the senior pilot group, discussing restructuring, mentioning early retirement packages and route reassignments. Changes that forced long-time pilots like Grant to question their future. Whatever it was, he pushed it aside as he completed the final checks. In the air, even a moment's distraction could spell disaster. The flight attendants began boarding the plane, familiar faces. Cheerful greetings, light laughter. It brought a sense of calm to the whole crew. Grant had always believed that a successful flight depended not just on the pilot's skill, but on the entire team working in harmony. He remembered everyone's name, asked about their families, their lives. Among them was Monica Blake, the lead flight attendant who had flown alongside Grant for nearly 8 years. Her professionalism was legendary in the industry, along with her uncanny ability to soothe even the most difficult passengers with serene composure. "Good morning, Captain." Monica greeted him with a smile, her eyes briefly flicking to the cockpit with mild curiosity. Just the two of you flying today? Grant raised an eyebrow. This route only needs a basic crew. Ethan and I have it covered. Monica frowned slightly. That's odd. I heard there was a routine check today, something about pilot evaluations. Before he could respond, Grant's phone buzzed. A message from Operations Captain Matthews. Please confirm the presence of an observer in the cockpit today. Captain Gregory Hale will be conducting a routine assessment per new FAA guidelines. Ah, that explains it, Grant said, handing the phone to Ethan. Both men looked at each other, surprised. Routine evaluations weren't unusual, but they were always scheduled in advance. In his 2 decades with the airline, Grant had never once received a surprise inspection. Monica nodded and returned to her duties, leaving Grant to mull over the morning's strange developments. Passengers began boarding, and Grant stepped out of the cockpit for a few minutes to stretch his legs and collect his thoughts. On the jet bridge, there was a flurry of movement ground staff performing final checks, passengers shuffling into the cabin. In the crowd, he caught a glimpse of an unfamiliar flight attendant, blonde hair and a high bun, uniform immaculate. She was speaking to the gate agent. When their eyes met, Grant noticed a flash of surprise and judgment. He made a mental note to introduce himself once they were airborne. What he didn't know then was that she was Lena Crawford. It was at that moment that Grant Matthews noticed her. A flight attendant he had never seen before was whispering with the gate agent. Her blonde hair was tied up neatly in a bun, her uniform crisp to perfection. When she glanced in his direction, their eyes met for only a second, but it was enough for Grant to sense something unmistakable surprise, and perhaps disapproval. A moment later, the woman turned away, resuming her conversation with discreet composure. Crew rotations were common, but her reaction left an uneasy feeling in Grant's chest, one he couldn't quite place. He told himself he'd properly introduce himself once the plane was cruising at altitude. When he returned to the cockpit, Grant found Ethan Park speaking with a tall man in a pristine pilot's uniform, unmistakably Captain Gregory Hale. Ah, Captain Matthews, the man said, extending his hand, his voice low and slightly formal. Gregory Hale. Apologies for joining your cockpit at the last minute. Grant shook his hand firmly. No problem at all. Captain, we're always ready for an assessment. Gregory smiled, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. This flight isn't exactly a standard check. Grant, mind if I call you Grant? Of course. Good. Upper management is taking a particular interest in this route. Nothing to worry about. Gregory took the observer seat behind the 2 pilots, his presence subtly altering the atmosphere in the cockpit. As the last of the passengers boarded, Grant reviewed the manifest one final time, a full flight with 223 passengers, including a group of students returning from a science competition, a few business travelers, and families heading out early for the summer break. The cabin ready signal chimed right on schedule. Monica Blake's voice confirmed everything was secure for departure. Everything proceeded smoothly, but the feeling of unease still lingered in Grant's mind. Like a thin cloud before a storm. Flight 2387, pushback approved. Came the voice of air traffic control through the headset. Copy. Commencing pushback. Grant responded, his tone calm and professional as he guided the Dreamliner away from the gate, beginning the complex sequence that would have them airborne within minutes. As the engines roared to life, the powerful thrust pulsing through the aircraft like the heartbeat of a giant beast, Grant felt his worries begin to melt away. This was where he belonged, in the cockpit of one of the most advanced aircraft in the world, carrying hundreds of lives on his shoulders, where his skill and resolve had been forged over decades. But what Grant couldn't know was that the true test of the day wouldn't come from Captain Hale. from turbulence or mechanical failure. It would come from something far worse, a strike at his honor and identity. The beginning of a chain of events no one on Flight 2387 could have foreseen. In the passenger cabin, Lena Crawford was conducting her final checks on the storage compartments and service carts. She had been with Aerosky Airlines for less than 6 months, having transferred from a smaller regional carrier after 8 years of building her reputation as a model employee. At 45, Lena had finally achieved her long-held career goal, working for a major airline, and she was determined to make an impression. Her personnel file was nearly spotless, 0 sick days, excellent performance reviews, well-versed in emergency procedures and top-tier service protocols. But what the file didn't reflect was the rigid worldview she had been raised with in a small town in Ohio. A mindset of black-and-white definitions of who belonged where and why. That morning, as she stepped into Terminal 1 of midfield, Lena carried not just her personal luggage, but also a collection of anecdotes she had prepared to impress Monica Blake, the lead flight attendant, someone who might help accelerate her path to promotion. Their conversation at the gate had been interrupted by the arrival of a pilot, a black man wearing captain's stripes. Lena had assumed he was at the wrong gate, or perhaps covering for a short domestic route. When Monica abruptly ended the conversation to return to work, Lena felt she had missed something important. Minutes later, as she double-checked the crew list, she discovered the source of her confusion. The man she had seen earlier was Captain Grant Matthews, the commanding officer of the very flight she was assigned to. Lena's mind reeled. In 18 years in the industry, she had only ever encountered 2 black pilots, both co-pilots, both flying for smaller carriers. The people occupying the highest seats, true captains commanding massive aircraft on transcontinental routes, had always fit a familiar mold, mostly middle-aged white men, occasionally Asian or Latino, but never. She stopped herself. A part of her was self-aware enough to recognize the dangerous terrain of her own thoughts. Of course, the world had changed. Surely. There were black captains. She just hadn't worked with one. That's all. Still. The doubt simmered in the back of Lena's mind as she checked the service equipment. Could there have been a crew assignment error? Or was this some kind of special training flight? The arrival of Captain Hale, a polished white man entering the aircraft in an observer role, only seemed to confirm Lena's assumptions. He had to be the one truly in charge. Lena Crawford was certain the distinguished man, Captain Gregory Hale, had to be the real captain. And today's flight was clearly part of some diversity initiative. That thought looped in her mind as the aircraft began pushing back from the gate. She had been assigned to serve in first class, the perfect position to closely observe who was actually running the flight. She had made up her mind she would be watching carefully. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Grant Matthews was steering the Dreamliner toward runway 10L, fully focused on the intricate choreography of traffic flows at Midfield Airport. Beside him, Ethan Park was communicating with the control tower, while behind them, Gregory Hale occasionally jotted down notes on a tablet. "Beautiful morning to fly," Grant remarked, his eyes on the horizon, where the first light of dawn was tracing Midtown's skyline. "Indeed," Hale replied. "I heard the fog's pretty thick over Clearwater Bay this morning, typical for this season." "Not a problem for the Dreamliner," Grant responded with quiet confidence. "I've landed in worse conditions." The aircraft reached the end of the runway, pausing momentarily as Grant received final clearance from the tower. The familiar sequence followed, pushing the throttle forward, feeling the engines roar to life, building speed, and then that magical moment when the wheels lifted off the ground and the massive metal bird soared into the clear morning sky. As the Dreamliner passed 8,000 feet, the cityscape of Midtown shrank below them, like a meticulously crafted miniature. Grant felt that familiar sense of awe. No matter how many times he had flown, the miracle of flight never ceased to amaze him. Flight 2387, contact Midtown Center on frequency 134.2, came the controller's voice. Switching to 134.2, Grant confirmed, adjusting the radio. The aircraft leveled off at its cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. Autopilot was engaged as they continued westward. It was during such calm moments that the cockpit often became a space for conversation stories, industry updates, and occasionally personal matters. "So, Captain Hale," Grant began, "what exactly is this evaluation about? The message I received was a bit vague." Gregory looked up from his tablet. "It's part of a new initiative from headquarters. They're focusing on standardizing the flight crew framework, especially with our growing international routes and increasingly diverse teams." It sounded reasonable, but something in Hale's tone made Grant suspect there was more to it. Before he could ask further, the cockpit door opened and Lena Crawford entered with a tray of coffee. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said in a professional tone, handing out the drinks. "Captain Hale." Right, her eyes locked directly onto Gregory, completely bypassing Grant. That subtle emphasis, the deliberate eye contact, easily dismissed as an honest mistake. But Grant had seen too many such mistakes not to recognize the undertone. "Actually," Grant corrected gently, "I'm Captain Matthews. This is First Officer Park, and Captain Hale is here as today's observer." Lena maintained her smile, but a flicker of unease passed through her eyes. "Ah, of course. My apologies." She turned toward Grant, still smiling, though it didn't reach her eyes. "How do you take your coffee?" "Captain Matthews Black." "Thank you," Grant replied, keeping his usual composure, though the familiar sting of subtle disdain crept up in his chest. After Lena exited, Gregory leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "Does that sort of thing happen often?" Grant shrugged. "Often enough that it doesn't surprise me, but not so often that I've grown completely jaded." Ethan, double-checking the navigation system, glanced over with a look of understanding. As an Asian American pilot, he had also encountered prejudice, though in different ways. "This industry's changing," Gregory observed. "Slowly. But it is. When I started flying in '91, he continued, you could count the number of black captains on one hand. 30 years later," Grant chuckled softly, "you still don't need all 5 fingers." Then he nodded. "But you're right. My daughter's generation sees the world very differently." "You have a daughter?" Gregory asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Grant nodded, his expression softening. "Ava, 26. She's in her final year at Westbridge Medical School. Her mother and I thought she'd follow in my footsteps. She's got the knack, great spatial awareness, cool under pressure. But after Rachel passed, Ava chose medicine instead." "I'm sorry to hear about your wife," Gregory said sincerely. "Thank you. It's been 8 years. Cancer," Grant said quietly. "Rachel was a pediatric cardiologist. Ava wants to follow that same path." Their conversation drifted to family, what brought them to flying, and the changing landscape of the aviation industry. It was the kind of natural camaraderie often found between pilots, a sense of fraternity that, while increasingly diverse, remained rooted in shared responsibilities and experiences at 37,000 feet. As the flight continued to glide over the American Midwest, the passengers gradually settled into their own journeys. Many dozed off. Others watched movies on their personal screens, tapped away on laptops, or read books. In first class, Lena Crawford served attentively, with professionalism and precision. But every time she entered the cockpit to deliver refreshments or relay updates, A vague tension crept into the air. She always directed her questions toward Ethan Parker Gregory Hale, avoiding Grant Matthews' gaze and position entirely as if silently denying his authority. It was a form of quiet resistance, but clear enough to be unmistakable. 3 hours after takeoff. As the aircraft cruised over Nebraska, the first sign of trouble appeared. It didn't come from the engines, the weather, or any technical fault. It came from what seemed like an innocuous conversation, one that would ignite an unpredictable chain reaction. Grant had just returned to the cockpit after a brief break to stretch his legs and visit the crew lavatory. As he stepped inside, he saw Lena standing in the cockpit, chatting with Gregory and Ethan. "It's just a bit odd. That's all," she was saying. "In my experience, pilots assigned to international routes usually have at least 20 years with the airline. Captain Matthews has over 22 years of experience," Ethan replied, his voice noticeably firmer. "Before that, he flew F-16s in the Air Force." Lena's expression showed momentary surprise, but it felt somewhat exaggerated. "Really? That's impressive. I just thought, since Captain Hale is here—" "What exactly are you implying?" Miss Crawford Grant asked calmly as he settled back into the captain's seat. Lena startled, not having realized he had returned. "Oh, Captain Matthews, I was just commenting on today's crew. It seems a little out of the ordinary." "There's nothing unusual at all," Grant said firmly. "Captain Hale is conducting a routine evaluation, which all pilots go through." He turned to the radar screen. "If you don't mind, we need to begin preparing for our approach. We'll start descending in about an hour." Lena nodded, somewhat stiffly, and exited the cockpit, the door shutting behind her with a definitive click. "Smooth," Ethan muttered. Grant sighed. "I told you. It's not uncommon." Gregory, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Regardless, the way you handled that professional, direct, without letting it escalate. Well done." "Thanks," Grant replied, though unease lingered inside him. Was this part of the evaluation? Observing how he handled subtle challenges to his authority, his composure in the face of bias. Meanwhile, Lena stood at the front of the cabin, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged the first-class lunch trays. The encounter had left her feeling wounded and dismissed. That emotion quickly curdled into resentment. In Lena's mind, she had done nothing wrong. She had simply voiced a reasonable concern based on her experience. That experience, however shaped by unexamined bias, was a different matter altogether. As she folded the napkins with quiet irritation, Lena made a decision. She would find out the truth about Captain Matthews. Something had to be off. She was sure of it. What she didn't expect was that her next action would not only threaten her own career, but would unearth secrets long buried, changing everything for everyone aboard Flight 387. Outside, the Dreamliner soared past the majestic Rocky Mountains, where early summer snow still clung to the jagged peaks. In the cockpit, Grant drifted into a quiet reflection on the path that had led him to the captain's chair. He remembered the day his father took him to a small airfield near Cleveland when he was just 7. The thunder of the engines, the wide-eyed wonder as he watched planes take off. Then, years later, during career week in high school, an Air Force officer saw something in the quiet, determined teenager's eyes. What followed were grueling years of training, each achievement shadowed by the same question: do you really belong here? A penny for your thoughts. Captain Ethan broke the silence. Grant smiled. Just admiring the mountains. No matter how many times I fly over them, the Rockies never get old. The first time I saw them was when I was 8, Ethan said. My family had just immigrated from Taiwan. I pressed my face against the window of a Delta 767 and thought America must be the most beautiful place in the world. Now you fly over them every week. Grant chuckled. Living the dream. Ethan nodded. Even if my mom still wishes I'd become a doctor. Their lighthearted exchange was interrupted by a soft chime from the flight operations message system. Grant glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing slightly. Stronger headwinds than expected. We'll need to recalculate fuel for the approach into Clearwater Bay. As Grant and Ethan recalculated their flight plan, running the complex numbers almost reflexively, Lena was performing a different kind of calculation. During her break, she quietly made her way to the rear galley, where the purser's tablet was kept a device containing the full passenger and crew manifests, as well as internal links to the operations center. Using the pretext of checking special meal orders, she opened the crew profile section. Her finger hovered over the search bar for a moment before she typed Matthews Grant. The system prompted for a crew ID and a reason for accessing the flight crew records mid-flight. Lena Crawford hesitated for a moment, then selected crew coordination from the drop-down list. The file opened, confirming the basics. Grant Matthews, captain, departing from midfield, with 22 years of service. But as Lena scrolled down, one detail caught her attention, a note about a 6-month leave taken 3 years ago. The reason listed simply read, personal. In Lena's eyes, that gap was a flaw, a suspicious gap in an otherwise near-perfect record. She continued reviewing, accessing Grant's flight certifications. Everything was current valid ATP commercial pilot's license, updated medical certificate, complete training record. Yet Lena still felt unsatisfied. There had to be something else. Something that would explain why Gregory Hale was really on this flight. Her thoughts were interrupted when Monica Blake unexpectedly entered the galley. Lena, what are you doing with the crew tablet? Monica's tone wasn't quite stern, but it lacked the usual warmth. Oh, I was just double-checking the special meal count, Lena responded quickly, hastily closing the personnel record. I was worried we might be short on vegetarian meals. Monica squinted, clearly skeptical. That information's in the catering manifest, not the crew roster. She paused, her gaze narrowing on Lena. Is something going on? You've seemed distracted since takeoff. I'm fine. Really. I just picked up an extra shift yesterday. A bit tired is all. Lena offered a harmless smile. Monica seemed like she was about to ask more. But at that moment, the cockpit call chime sounded over the intercom. She turned and left, leaving Lena alone with her swirling, unresolved thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Matthews. Grant's voice came over the PA a few minutes later, warm, confident, and steady. The voice of someone who held the lives of hundreds in his hands. We're beginning our descent into the Clearwater Bay area. The current time is 10:48. Mum, there's a light fog, a classic morning here. We expect a smooth landing, though there may be minor turbulence as we pass through the cloud layer. Please fasten your seatbelts and begin stowing your belongings. Thank you for flying with Aerosky today. As the announcement ended, sleepy passengers stirred to life, folding blankets, removing headphones, and preparing for landing. In first class, an older gentleman in a tailored suit working on a laptop signaled to Lena as she passed by. "Excuse me," he said. "The captain for this flight is Matthews." "Correct." Lena hesitated. "Yes, sir. Do you know him?" The man smiled. "Grant and I are old squadron mates. We flew together in the Air Force. Would you tell him Richard Delaney in Seat 2A says hello? Let him know his old wingman is on board." Lena's inner world shook. If what the man said was true, and given his calm confidence and first-class seat, it seemed entirely credible. Then the captain's military background was completely legitimate. But that still didn't explain Gregory Hale's presence on the flight, or that mysterious leave of absence. As the aircraft descended through 12,000 feet, and it was time for the final cabin report to the cockpit, Lena volunteered for the task, surprising Monica slightly. In the cockpit, Grant and Ethan were fully focused on navigating the approach through the dense clouds covering Clearwater Bay. Instructions from air traffic control came in steadily, each parameter, each control adjustment executed with precision. "Cabin is secured, Captain," Lena reported crisply. "Thank you." "Ms. Crawford," Grant replied, his eyes never leaving the instrument panel. "There's a passenger in seat 2A who asked me to relay a message," Lena continued. "His name is Richard Delaney. He says he served with you in the Air Force, for the first time since she'd entered." Grant turned to look at her. A warm smile spread across his face. "Rich is on this flight? That's great. Thank you. Please let him know I'll see him after landing." Lena nodded, but instead of leaving, she remained standing, her hand lightly resting on the cockpit doorframe. "He said you were a fighter pilot. That must have been quite the experience," Grant answered briefly. "It had its moments, some tough, some unforgettable," Lena continued, her voice casual but laced with chill. "I noticed in your file there was an extended leave a few years ago. Was that related to your military service?" The cockpit froze. Grant's expression hardened, and Ethan turned sharply toward Lena, disbelief written across his face. Gregory, from the observer's seat, looked visibly surprised, perhaps even stunned by how far the question had crossed the line. "Ms. Crawford," Grant said slowly but clearly, "my personal history has no bearing on this flight. We are in final approach to a challenging airport under unfavorable weather conditions. Please ensure the cabin is secure and return to your seat immediately." That's an order." "Miss Crawford," Grant Matthews said firmly, "and please close the cockpit door on your way out." The door shut behind her with a sharp click. Ethan Park shook his head. "What the hell just happened?" Grant didn't answer right away. He focused on the task of landing in low-visibility conditions. The Dreamliner was descending through 5,000 feet, fog swirling to obscure and then reveal glimpses of the city below. Air traffic control was guiding them along a standard approach path to runway 28R, weaving between the hills surrounding Clearwater Bay. United 2387 descend to 3,000 feet, reduce speed to 180 knots, descending to 3,000 soars, slowing to 180. Grant confirmed, his voice calm and devoid of any hint of the tension that had just unfolded. Once the aircraft leveled off at the new altitude, he finally responded to Ethan's question. "Some people only see what they want to see. Ethan, nothing more, nothing less." Ethan still looked unsettled. "She accessed your personal file mid-flight. That crosses a serious line." From the observer's seat, Gregory Hale finally spoke. "It doesn't just cross a line. That's a serious security breach and definitely against company policy. I'll have to mention it in my report. For now, let's just focus on landing this bird safely." Gregory concluded. The Dreamliner continued its descent through the thick gray clouds. The first rays of sunlight pierced the mist, revealing the faint outlines of the Golden Gate Bridge and the iconic skyline beyond. No one in the cockpit could have imagined that what awaited them at Gate 72 would render the tension moments earlier almost trivial. In the main cabin, most passengers remained blissfully unaware of what was quietly unfolding. They were busy folding blankets, powering off devices, and preparing to return to life on the ground. But in first class, Richard Delaney noticed everything. He had watched Lena Crawford exit the cockpit, spine straight, grip tight around the service tray, her expression rigid, like someone barely containing a storm inside. A former fighter pilot turned corporate executive, Delaney understood body language better than most. He had once staked his life on reading what his wingman was thinking mid-air, and later wagered millions on reading the room during tense negotiations. He knew Lena was caught in a struggle between reality and the biases she'd carried for years. He'd encountered her type before those who believed the world should operate according to the template they inherited. And when reality didn't fit, they resisted fiercely. And he knew that Grant Matthews was about to face not just personal prejudice, but a much larger collision and underlying clash between bias and truth. Pulling out his phone, Delaney quickly typed a message. "On your flight, Blonde FA seems too interested in your background. Be careful." That message would never be sent, because what was about to happen would make any warning irrelevant. The Dreamliner touched down on runway 28R with the kind of finesse only seasoned pilots could deliver under such conditions. Passengers seemed to sense the difference. Some looked up and nodded in quiet approval. The fog began to lift, revealing a bright, sunlit morning over Clearwater Bay. In the cockpit, a strange calm settled the stillness that follows the execution of a complex task. "Nice landing, Captain," Ethan said as he began contacting ground control. "One of your best," Gregory added, unclipping his seat belt and opening his tablet to prepare for the post-flight debrief. Grant simply offered a slight smile, his hand steady on the yoke as the aircraft turned onto the taxiway leading to Gate 72. There were many ways to evaluate a pilot, but passengers always felt the landing most. Grant understood that, but he also knew sometimes a safe landing didn't always feel smooth, especially in weather like this. As the plane neared the gate, the ground crew was already in position. The jet bridge operator stood ready to connect the tunnel as soon as the engines powered down. "United 2387, welcome to Clearwater Bay. You are cleared to park at Gate 72. Thank you. Ground." Taxiing to 72. Grant confirmed. The post-landing checklist was carried out with the same precision as any takeoff, but none of them, neither Grant, nor Ethan, nor Gregory, could have anticipated that everything was only just beginning. The sequence of post-landing procedures was carried out with precision, an unchanging ritual that marked the end of every flight engine's shutting down. Systems switching to ground power. Forms completed to hand over to maintenance for the next leg. Gregory Hale gave a small nod, his voice even a textbook flight. "Gentlemen, Captain Matthews, I'll need about 30 minutes for the debrief before you head to the hotel," he said as the shutdown checklist was completed. Grant Matthews nodded, but his mind was already drifting toward the upcoming 24 hours in Clearwater Bay time he hoped to spend reconnecting with his old friend Richard Delaney and calling his daughter Zoe to find out what had been troubling her. Passengers were beginning to rise, retrieving their bags and lining up at the door. In the cockpit, the three pilots finalized the last tasks. Ethan Park would return to midfield on the evening flight, while Grant would captain the return journey the following day with a different first officer. "I'll do the walk around," Ethan offered, sensing that Grant and Gregory needed some space for their post-flight debrief. "Thanks, Ethan," Grant replied, quietly grateful for his younger colleague's tact. Once Ethan left, Gregory turned back, his expression serious. "Before we begin the formal debrief, I want to talk about what just happened with the flight attendant, Crawford." Right Grant sighed. "Honestly, Thomas, this isn't anything new. There are people who, when they see a black man in the captain's seat, simply can't accept it. They'll come up with any other explanation but competence. Be that as it may, Gregory said. Accessing personal records without authorization and challenging the chain of command during final approach, that's outright misconduct. I'm not arguing. A loud knock interrupted. Grant checked the door camera and unlocked it. Monica Blake stepped in, her face tense. Captain, sorry to interrupt, but something's happening on the jet bridge, and I think you should see it. What's going on? Grant stood grabbing his bag. It's Lena. She's making accusations about the flight that are upsetting some of the passengers. Mr. Delaney is trying to intervene, but it's escalating. Grant and Gregory exchanged a knowing glance and followed Monica through the now empty first-class cabin. As they approached the aircraft door, raised voices could already be heard. Absolutely irresponsible. Lena's voice rang out, high and indignant. This airline has protocols for a reason, and I am seriously concerned that those protocols were not followed today. A small crowd had gathered passengers, gate staff, even a few ground technicians drawn in by the commotion. At the center stood Lena Crawford, her face flushed, arms gesturing wildly as she argued with a visibly flustered customer service representative. Beside her stood Richard Delaney, calm and composed, eyes sharp with seasoned insight. In his charcoal suit and gold-cuffed shirt sleeves, he radiated the presence of someone who had once been a top fighter pilot and later a powerful corporate executive. Miss Crawford, he said with patient restraint, I've known Captain Matthews for over 30 years. Your concerns about his qualifications are completely unfounded. With all due respect, sir, Lena replied, her tone implying the opposite. You don't have access to the airline's internal records. There are issues regarding Captain Matthews that need to be addressed. Grant stepped forward, his presence instantly silencing the crowd. Every gaze turned to him. Passengers, staff, security, even travelers dragging suitcases paused mid-step. Miss Crawford, Grant said evenly and firmly, if you have concerns about my command authority, the proper channel is to file a report with management and the chief pilot's office, not to create a scene in the middle of the terminal. Lena turned to face him, her eyes blazing with resolve. Captain Matthews, if you are in fact the captain of this flight, I already contacted the chief pilot's office. They confirmed there was no scheduled evaluation for today. So why is Captain Hale on board what's really going on here? Murmurs spread through the crowd. Grant remained composed, though his chest burned. Once again, prejudice disguised as reasonable questioning had surfaced. Captain Hale's presence was duly arranged and noted in the flight plan. Grant replied, As for your insinuations about my identity, that's not insinuation, Lena cut in, voice rising. The crew assignment database has no record of a Captain Grant Matthews regularly assigned to this route. The regular captain for this route is James Hamilton. Lena Crawford's voice rang out, sharp and biting. He called in sick this morning. You are only listed as a reserve pilot, not the captain. A heavy silence settled over the terminal like a suffocating fog. Grant Matthews stood still, his uniform crisp, his composure outwardly calm, a stark contrast to the storm roiling inside him. The eyes around him were like needles filled with suspicion, judgment, condemnation. In front of him, Lena, her flight attendant badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, pointed a firm finger at his chest. I don't care what ID you show me, she said loudly enough for all to hear. There's no way you're the captain of this flight. 22 years of flying, over 12,000 hours in the cockpit, and still, he had to face this. Grant pulled out his phone, his fingers steady despite the rage and humiliation coursing through him. Just one call. That would be enough. One call to end this. Who are you calling? Lena asked, her confidence beginning to crack at the calm control Grant maintained. The chief pilot, Grant replied softly. Since you contacted them, I'm sure he'll be happy to confirm things. As Grant dialed, Gregory Hale stepped forward, removing the observer badge from his uniform jacket. Perhaps I can save everyone some time. Miss Crawford, he said, his voice as sharp as a scalpel. My name is Gregory Hale. I wasn't on this flight to conduct a route evaluation. He paused, letting his words settle heavily over the crowd. I'm the Executive Vice President of Flight Operations at Pacific Airways, and I was on this flight to observe Captain Matthews as part of our consideration for promoting him to Chief Flight Commander. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered passengers and staff. Lena's face went pale as Gregory continued. Captain Matthews has served this airline for 22 years. His record is exemplary, including 2 successful emergency landings in 2015 and 2019 that saved every life on board, and that leave of absence you accessed without authorization. It was to care for his daughter after a serious accident 3 years ago. Grant had lifted the phone to his ear but now slowly lowered it, locking eyes with Gregory in a quiet, profound acknowledgement. And furthermore, Gregory's tone now hardened. Your actions today, unauthorized access of personnel files, publicly questioning the authority of a captain, and inciting a disturbance at the boarding gate are serious violations of both company policy and federal aviation regulations. Just then, Grant's phone rang a video call from Chief Pilot Thompson. He answered it and turned the screen toward Lena. Chief, Grant said, I've been informed that Miss Crawford contacted your office regarding my assignment on today's flight. The silver-haired man on the screen frowned. Grant, I've heard nothing from you today. What's going on? Lena stammered. But I spoke to someone. They said they were from the chief pilot's office. Chief Thompson's voice grew cold. Miss Crawford, I've been in meetings all morning. Whoever you spoke to was clearly not me or anyone with the authority to confirm crew assignments. Captain Matthews was properly assigned to operate Flight 427 today. He is one of the most respected pilots in this company. What, exactly? Are you trying to dispute? Lena froze, her eyes darting, as if searching for an escape. Richard Delaney stepped forward, his voice deep and resonant across the terminal. Chief Thompson. I'm Richard Delaney, CEO of Quantum Defense Systems and a former Air Force pilot who flew with Captain Matthews. I was a passenger on this flight and witnessed Miss Crawford's behavior, which, in my judgment, stemmed from bias, not any genuine concern about safety or procedure. Chief Thompson's face went stony. I see. Miss Crawford, you are suspended pending a full investigation. Please surrender your employee badge to the gate agent immediately. But this is not a request. He cut her off, then turned back to Grant. Captain Matthews, I apologize for this incident. I'll need a full written report, but know that you have the full support of this company. The call ended. The crowd slowly dispersed. A few people cast sharp glances toward Lena. She stood frozen, face ghostly pale, as the real consequences of her actions finally settled in. Monica Blake approached, her voice calm but firm. I'll need your badge. Lena. Lena's hands trembled as she unclipped the badge from her chest, the badge that had once represented an entire career, now undone by her own pride and prejudice. Grant stepped forward. There was no anger on his face, only the weary look of a man who had been through this too many times. You know, Miss Crawford, he said quietly, the call I was about to make, it wasn't to the chief pilot. It was to my daughter Zoe. She needed to speak urgently, something that couldn't wait until after my layover. He paused, locking eyes with her. I wonder if I looked like Captain Hamilton. Would you have questioned my competence at all? Lena Crawford couldn't meet his gaze. I just wanted to make sure the passengers were safe, she murmured, though even she could hear the emptiness in her own excuse. Safety was never in question. Grant Matthews replied, his voice calm. The only thing harmed today was dignity mine, and ultimately, yours. He turned away and walked toward Richard Delaney and Gregory Hale, who were standing a few steps away, silent and respectful. Seems some things haven't changed as much as we'd hoped. Huh, Grant Richard said with a faint smile. Some things have, Grant replied, glancing at Gregory. 20 years ago, the one being suspended for investigation would have been me. Gregory nodded. This industry still has a long way to go, but we're moving one step at a time. And by the way, about the chief flight commander position, it's yours. If you want it. Today's flight only confirmed what I already knew. You're the kind of leader we need more of. The three men walked away from the gate, leaving behind a shaken Lena and the wreckage of the beliefs she had once held as absolute truth. Grant's phone buzzed. A message from Zoe Dad. Call me as soon as you land. I just got a fellowship at Johns Hopkins. Just like Mom. A smile spread across Grant's face, not just pride in his daughter, but the clarity of this realization. Even though people like Lena still existed, progress was happening generation by generation. His struggles today, the constant need to prove his worth, had helped carve out opportunity for Zoe, just as those before him had done for him. Good news, Delaney asked, catching the light in his friend's eyes. Great news, Grant replied. A reason to keep moving forward, even on days like this. As they walked through the terminal, passengers from Flight 427 began to recognize them. A few nodded or offered a quiet thanks. An elderly man stopped to shake Grant's hand and said simply, "Thank you for a safe flight. Captain, my grandson wants to be a pilot. He always talks about the people he sees on planes. I'll make sure he hears about you." Grant returned the handshake with genuine warmth. He knew representation matters. Somewhere out there, a child might be inspired seeing someone like him in the captain's seat just as he once was, looking up at the rare black pilots walking through airport security. In a quiet corner of the terminal, Lena sat alone, her career in pieces. In her hand was the ID badge she'd surrendered, not just a pass to restricted areas, but a symbol of belonging to a world she thought she understood. But as she watched Grant walk through the terminal with poise, receiving respect and recognition, despite her attempt to diminish him, Lena was forced to confront herself and the bias that had led her to this moment. This wasn't just the collapse of one isolated action. It was the beginning of a long, internal reckoning, a journey where she'd have to reevaluate the very foundations of belief that had been ingrained in her for a lifetime. As for Grant, what happened today would become another story he'd tell colleagues, another trial he had faced in a distinguished career. But for Lena, it was the beginning of something else, an inward journey, which, if she had the courage to face it, could lead to real change. And as the passengers of Flight 427 continued toward their various destinations, many carried more than just memories of a safe flight from Chicago to Clearwater Bay. They carried a lesson about bias, dignity, and quiet heroism, about those who rise, again and again, in the face of barriers. In the days that followed, the incident would spark internal conversations at Pacific Airways around bias training and diversity initiatives. Gregory Hale would use the case as a cornerstone example to push for cultural reform. Richard Delaney would recount it in a commencement speech at Howard University, urging the next generation of pilots to build a fairer, more inclusive aviation industry. And Grant Matthews would officially accept his role as Chief Flight Commander, continuing to lead not just with skill across continents, but with perseverance and quiet determination to shift perspectives and clear the path for those to come. Because the most important flight wasn't from Chicago to Clearwater Bay. It was the one that spans a lifetime toward a world where seeing a black pilot in the captain's seat is no longer a surprise to anyone. Some flights last only a few hours, but their echoes stay with us for a lifetime. The story of Captain Grant Matthews wasn't just a journey from Chicago to Clearwater Bay. It was a flight of a whole generation. A generation that rose above bias, prejudice, and adversity to prove their worth through skill, integrity, and relentless perseverance. What made this journey so powerful wasn't just the intense confrontation between a man and invisible barriers, but the transformation it sparked. A woman, carrying inherited prejudice, was forced in a single moment to confront the limits of her understanding. A man, after decades of quiet dedication, was finally seen and valued for who he truly was. And a daughter, from afar, continued the journey with a message of hope. The next generation is changing the world quietly, but powerfully. Perhaps what touches the heart most in this story is the raw truth behind every word, every glance, every gesture. We witnessed injustice, but also compassion. We saw judgment, but ultimately, we felt grace and awakening. We hope that by watching this video, you've found a piece of yourself within it. Maybe you're someone who's had to endure others' doubts. Or perhaps you've once judged someone too quickly because they didn't fit an expected mold. Wherever you stand, we're all learning each day how to become better versions of ourselves. If this story has moved you in any way, don't hesitate to leave a comment and share your thoughts. What you write might just give someone else the strength they need, just like Grant gave hope to those who follow. And if you want to help spread more stories like this, stories filled with meaning and inspiration, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every interaction you make is not just support, but a way to keep kindness and understanding moving forward in the world. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Believe this change begins with awareness, and each of us has the power to be part of that change.